Hey guys, today we're going to meet a special guy in the video named Ed. Ed's a good close friend of mine. He lives here in the Chicago area. And I want you to think of this verse as you hear his story today. The Bible says, God promises, I will make my dwelling among them and walk among them, and I will be their God. Ed was a rabbi, and he thought he kind of had it all figured out about how to follow God, what it meant to live for God, but yet he had a struggle. And so in this video today, he's going to share some of those struggles with you that radically changed his life perspective. Everything came crashing down, and yet through the ashes, God has rebuilt his life and done something more beautiful in his life than he could ever do for himself. And so listen to this video and remember that God has chosen to make his dwelling with his people, and see his dwelling right now with Ed.
Hi, my name's Ed Schlager, and I want to humbly ask you for a few minutes of your time to tell you a bit about my past and how I received what I consider to be the greatest gift possible, aside from my birth from my mother when I was born in April of 1955. In August of 1996, I was reborn, and my life took a turn forever that I received through no action of myself other than finding a new set of friends and brothers and sisters who helped me to become connected to the Lord. I experienced my rebirth uniquely. Each one of us are different how we find the Lord, and that's great because God creates each one of us with complete uniqueness. And for me, I found a life of election and inheritance, and I was raised as a Jew. Not only was I raised as a Jew, but I became later in my life, through my career, a rabbi, as a teacher of Jewish people, as a leader to bring people closer to God. And that's something that I found incredibly ironic, and that I myself found it very difficult to grow close to God as a Jew. My ancestors are people that were involved in the Jewish community for decades. My great-grandfather was a rabbi who worked as a Zionist for the establishment of Israel. My other grandfather, my mother's father, was a rabbi and died at a very young age at 41, leaving my mom at 11 years old without her dad. And because of that, even before I was born, my mother was very cut off from her world. My father was a child of immigrants from Russia who, again, was a person who achieved great things in his life, but emotionally was stunted, and his relationship with the divine was really a problem. And together, being their children, my sister and I suffered what I consider to be a tremendous amount of abuse in a household with a mother who was mentally ill and my father who didn't know what to do with our family situation. So he just fled away in his mind, so to speak, or became enraged when things didn't go his way. This isn't something very different than a lot of other people that what they experience in life. But I always found that doesn't minimize that experience either. And it was very easy for me to grow up as we'll call it a victim of that kind of abuse. I know that the one thing that I wished from the time of being a little boy was that I wished for that rainbow, Dorothy's rainbow, that somewhere over the rainbow I'd find that happiness. And I'll use the word that's been very important for me, safety, a sense of safety in daily life. And that I would develop over time safe relationships. And that's something that I tried to do earnestly, but never had the tools to do that because I hadn't grown up in a very safe environment. So for me, life continued until I was a young teenager with experiences that were deeply negative, that were few and far between, but yet were very impactful. But when I was a teenager and just about to begin high school, two events occurred that changed my life forever. One was that I was sexually assaulted at a summer camp that was, in fact, a Jewish summer camp, which was ironic because here it was a place that my parents had sent me to gain more of a religious identity, and that was the very place that I found the greatest threat to my sense of who I was. And the other thing is that I became a young teenager, and with all of the hormonal changes and everything that meant. And so basically what I found that in a life that had been so unsafe, that the most safe way I could deal with life would be to hide and to have a separate existence, which I found to be very accessible through lust, through pornography, through fantasy, through being sexual, but in a way that didn't involve anybody else because I didn't trust anybody else. So that was something I longed for, but had no way to achieve. And you know what? That continued for many, many years, many years. Being 18 at the time, or 14 actually, I think that probably continued till I was 50. And in those years, when you develop a fantasy world, you're literally split off from who you are. And I certainly was split off from God, to the point where I had a public self, that I was a rabbi leading services, doing things, studying, going to seminaries, achieving degree after degree. But yet, you know what? I never had one single day of happiness in my life that wasn't filled with anxiety and worry. It's the one thing that consumed me, and that's fear. Fear to go forward. I somehow would live with it, but I never was able to rise beyond it. And the answer to that, as you probably know already, for those that you are seeing this testimony, is that God wasn't in charge. I felt that I was in charge, that if anybody was going to do it, it was going to have to be me. Well, lo and behold, after many years of being married and having two children, who are now 23 and 15 years of age, two daughters, I had grown so engrossed into my fantasy world that basically nobody knew about, except people that I was acting out with in the world, in my secret life, that I had inadvertently eroded my entire relationship with my family and led to me leaving my spouse for an adulterous relationship that included an immense attachment to internet pornography. And that's probably one of the things that I hope to teach about the most in the future, is the dangers that exist for people that believe that they can find safety in what's online and how dangerous that is. So ultimately in 2004, I left my spouse, and as a result of that, I was cut off from seeing my children anymore. And ultimately, in a very bitter divorce battle, things were done where pictures and various areas of pornography that I had seen and had downloaded were turned into the legal authorities, and I was ultimately arrested and convicted for problems associated with sexual misbehaviors. What the end result of that was that my life was destroyed. My life here on earth, careers that I had established, my reputation in the community, salaries, ability to earn a living, everything was taken away from me. And I came to find out that there was a lot of reasons for that. During this period of time, I entered into recovery, going to various 12-step groups, and through a process of recovery, I met my sponsor, who became incredibly close to me and actually brought me into a relationship with Jesus Christ. That happened through us working our programs together. I found that that working with my friend Lou, that eventually he was a man who said to me in our recovery work that I really can't work with you if I don't read to you selections from the New Testament. And I said, you know, Lou, I don't care what you do. I want what you have, which was his recovery, his sobriety, his ability to be in touch with God without being in touch with porn and illicit relationships. Treating the world as objects. No, he treated his world as a relationship. This is a man that went through a very hard life himself and lost everything. But since then, both of us have regained much of what we had because in a new way, and that is with the Lord. So what happened was one day I said to him, Lou, could I read the New Testament? And he said, you're a rabbi, what are you, nuts? And I said, yeah, I may be, but you know what, I want you what you have. So he said to me, well, why don't you read the book of John? And I said, well, okay. And I went home that night, and I was actually living with a woman who was in this illicit relationship. It was wrong. And on my own, and she wasn't particularly supportive of that, of course, I began to read the book of John. And that same night, when I read chapter 3 of John, my heart was ripped open from stem to stern, and I read that I could be reborn and that I could have a new life that I never thought possible. Later that evening, reading parts of Matthew, I read about never having to worry again in my life, that there was no need to worry and that God would provide for me, and that the only thing I needed to do was to accept him. And it was in that act of weeping for hours and hours that Jesus came into my life and comforted me and said, it's okay, Ed. I can't remove the consequences from you, and I won't do that. But I will love you no matter what happens. And in fact, I went on and was prosecuted and was arrested and went through all the problems that I've had to deal with. But you know what? I've been able to deal with all of that because of my love of Jesus, that I realized that he gave everything to us, his very existence, his blood for us to be filled with grace and to be able to have a brighter future. And you know what? I no longer have had for years now a single day of intense anxiety. Sure, we're all human and at times we get worried or whatever, but by and large, I've been filled increasingly with love, trust, a building trust in the Lord, that where he knows every single thought of mine. He is sovereign over my life, over my family's life, over my children, over my friends, over you, and all of that's wonderful. And I hope that my words somehow bring you a little bit of strength. They're from the Lord. I don't have a script here. I just spoke from my heart. And we love you. And thank you, Lord. Thanks a lot.